From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Our author today, Chris Bohjalian, describes himself in his social media bio as author, bicyclist, and gym rat. He is those things, I'm sure, as well as a New York Times best-selling author of 19 books. His novel Midwives was a #1 New York Times bestseller, a selection of Oprah's book club, a Publisher's Weekly Best Book, and a New England Booksellers Association Discovery Pick. His work has been translated into over 30 languages and 3 motion pictures, and a 4th is in the works, with the Sandcastle Girls being adapted for a feature film. He's written for many publications, including The Times, The Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, and Reader's Digest. He is currently a fellow of the Vermont Academy of Arts and Sciences, and his latest novel, The Sleepwalkers, was released in January. And readers can anxiously anticipate his next novel, The Flight Attendant, in March. Chris's awards include the Armenian National Committee of American Freedom Award for his work in educating Americans about the Armenian genocide, the Armenian National Committee of America Arts and Letters Award for the Sandcastle Girls, the New England Society Book Award for The Night Strangers, the New England Book Award, Russia's Concord Award for the Sandcastle Girls, a Boston Public Library Literary Light, a finalist for the Lambda Literary Awards for Transistor Radio, a Best Lifestyle column for Idle Banter, and the Vermont Press Association. Fans of his work marvel at his ability to develop a character with such depth and artful language. He says that he allows the characters to develop and lead him through the stories. His books are always edited using a fountain pen. As he says, they are messy and they force you to think slowly. Chris has said that he found his voice in Vermont, where he lives with his wife, Victoria, that it is there he was able to develop the novels and characters that readers have come to know and love. We are very glad that he's brought his voice here to DC in the National Book Festival today. Please note that after Chris's remarks, he will be in the book signing section from 1 to 2 p.m. Please join me in welcoming Chris to the festival stage.
Thank you, Amy, for that introduction. It is a pleasure, it is an honor, it is a privilege to be at the National Book Festival today. I spoke yesterday at the Library of Congress, which is one of the great honors any author can ever experience. I thank all of you for celebrating with me today what words and reading and books can mean to the soul. It's a particular pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon because I'm not on a book tour. Make no mistake, I like book tours. It wasn't all that long ago that my book sold briskly, but only among people with my last name. I try never to lose sight of that. Most people presume, however, that book tours are unbelievably glamorous. You jet around the country and you hang with Oprah and Katie and Terry Gross and sell whole pallets of books. But the reality of most book tours is this: they have moments that are far more humbling than are honorific, such as this afternoon. I will share with you but one. I am in Memphis, Tennessee. I get to the airport at 5 in the morning because I am on a 6 a.m. flight to Jackson, Mississippi. When I get there, everything on the concourse is closed, except for one guy with a cart selling something he calls a gritty cat, a bear claw pastry that is then deep fried in grits. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have one of those bad boys. I'm just about to get on a turboprop. Why not? So I have my gritty cat. It's not bad. Get on the plane. It's a 17-seater, and there are 3 other passengers, and it's a really choppy, rainy day. And so the pilot says we're going to be on the tarmac for a little bit, and it's going to be a choppy ride, no cabin service. We take off, and it is choppy. We've been in the air no more than, 3.5 minutes when the woman 2 rows behind me vomits. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm a frequent flyer, but just in case, let's get the air sickness bag. So I reach into the seat pocket to get the air sickness bag, and there's not one there, at which point the gentleman a few rows ahead of me vomits. So I'm thinking to myself, these are more desperate times than you realize. So I unbuckle, stand up, planning to go seat to seat to find an air sickness bag. So I stand up, unbuckle, and the flight attendant says to me, "Sir, sit down now." And in a post-9/11 era, when a flight attendant says, sit down now, you do, and I did. And at that point, the third other passenger vomited, leaving me the last passenger standing. So we do level out, and we are circling for a really long time over Jackson because the air is so choppy, and I'm increasingly worried about this chop and whether I'm going to make it. But finally, the pilot says we're about to begin our descent, and I'm thinking, you're good. But we hit a bump, and it's pretty scary. So I reach into the seat pocket ahead of me, take out the in-flight magazine, rip out 2 thick, glossy pages, swirl them into a snow cone, fold the bottom, and I don't know whether it is 1,000 feet above Jackson or 2,000 feet above Jackson, but you're looking at the guy who created the first ever airborne snow cone of vomit. So we land, and the flight attendant's very grateful that I don't give him my airborne snow cone of vomit. I go to the men's room, I clean myself up, and then I go to baggage. Whenever you are on a book tour, your publisher gives you an escort. Not that kind. These are the lovely women and men who know where all of the libraries and the bookstores are, and they get you to and from the airport, and you find them in baggage because they are holding up your book. So I go into baggage and I see a woman holding a book, not my book, and I'm thinking, wow, that's a cookbook. One of the people on the plane with you was a chef. But then she says, "Chris?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Hi," and she introduces herself, and she says, "I forgot your book at home, but I found this cookbook in the back seat of the car and figured it would do just fine." And then she says, "I got some bad news. You circled so long that you missed your slot on the public radio station." And I said, "That's okay." And then she says, "You must be hungry." And as a matter of fact, I was. And so she said, "I'm going to bring you to the best waffles in Jackson." And I get in the car with her, and we drive, and all of a sudden we are in the country, nowhere near a restaurant, and I realize I am living out Stephen King's Misery. I am never going to see my wife and daughter again. And in the middle of nowhere, we pull into a house, and in all fairness, it's a really nice house. We're talking serious meadow mansion. But she gets out of the car, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat thinking, do you text in 911? And she says in her best Sandra Bullock, the Blind Side voice, "Well, are you coming?" And I realized I was a-coming, so I got out of the car, I follow her into the garage, and there's a door. And I know that behind that door is either a kitchen or a dungeon. We open the door, and yes, it's a kitchen, and in there are 4 guys in golf clothes, 2 massive Williams-Sonoma waffle makers. She's brought me to her house where her husband, her brother-in-law, and their 2 best friends from Minnesota get together every week in October for golf and waffles. She welcomes me into this wonderful man cave, and her husband says to me with a red bowl and a green bowl, "What would you like on your waffles?" We got ourselves pulled pork and Cajun shrimp. And I said, I'm a blueberry waffle man myself. And his wife says, "George, I told you, he's a vegetarian." At which point, George, and I'm not making up one word of this, says, "I'm going to make you something special." He gets out a stool, reaches up into the top shelf of the pantry, gets down a bag of grits, and says, "You ever had yourself a gritty cat waffle?" I actually categorize this among the honorific moments because it was a really lovely morning, and the way that this woman welcomed me into her home and her family, it was a great, great day. It's a particular pleasure to be at this book festival because it is all about libraries and the Library of Congress. I am a novelist for a lot of reasons, but a big one are libraries, and very specifically, the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library in South Florida. When I was in 8th grade, my family moved from a suburb of New York City to Miami, Florida, which is arguably another suburb of New York City. And we moved there the Friday of Labor Day weekend. That Tuesday, I started school at Palm Springs Junior High, and then I went to see my new orthodontist, a sadist, it would turn out, if ever there was one. He gave me some orthodontic headgear that looked like the business end of a backhoe. Think Bane from the movie Batman, The Dark Knight. And I had to wear this device for 4 hours a day. I wasn't allowed to sleep when I was wearing it. I couldn't speak when I was wearing it. So I would come home from Palm Springs Junior High. I would put in my headgear, and I would go to the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library, and I would read. And I would read so many of the books that an eighth grader was likely to read in the late 1970s. Stephen King had started publishing his remarkable Grand Guignol. I read William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, Peter Benchley's deceptively wonderful and really appropriate if you live in South Florida novel Jaws, and I read a higher caliber of literature as well. It was at that library for the first time that I read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Joyce Carol Oates' National Book Award winning The Expensive People. I still recall the first sentence of Expensive People. 5 words. I was a child murderer. The next 3 pages deconstruct that one short sentence. Is the narrator an adult who one time as a child accidentally killed someone? Or something far darker, an adult serial killer who on a regular basis murders small children? I was a child murderer. From those books, I learned so much that would help me as an adult writer. From the Blatty and the Benchley, I first learned the importance of linear momentum and narrative drive. What is it in a book that keeps us turning the pages into the small hours of the morning? From Harper Lee and Joyce Carol Oates, I first began to realize that the narrator in a first-person novel is a fictional construct too, and every bit as made up as the fictional characters around him or her. Now, you would think after an epiphany like that in 8th grade, I would be killing it as a young writer. Nope. You're looking at a guy who managed to amass 250 rejection slips before he sold a single word. So when you graduate from college, Penguin Random House doesn't say to you, you look like a young writer of promise. Here's a boatload of money, go write us a book. So you get a day job. And I was working in New York City at an ad agency, and my wife was working as a bond trader on the 104th floor of Two World Trade. And every day between 5 and 7 a.m. in the morning, I would write fiction. I would write very F. Scott Fitzgerald-esque short stories and send them relentlessly to the New Yorkers and Harper's and the Sewanee Review and be summarily and consistently rejected. And I remember when I got rejection slip number 250 thinking to myself, plan A not working. Time to try plan B. And at the time, Cosmopolitan was publishing a lot of fiction. So I rounded up 6 months worth of Cosmopolitans, and I read them thoroughly, really trying to understand what constitutes a Cosmopolitan short story, and then I wrote one. It's about a female supermodel who lives in Lower Manhattan and is married to a fabulously wealthy arbitrage trader, but their marriage is kind of dicey. So one weekend, she goes out to their equally cool beach house on Fire Island, the Atlantic Ocean, to see if their marriage can be saved, but instead spends the entire time playing scantily clad beach volleyball. Cosmopolitan bought it. First story I ever sold. And for the archivists among us, I need to tell you that it is in a very special issue of Cosmopolitan, the only issue of Cosmopolitan, a magazine that is known for sex, that ever had nudity in it. I am in the, yes, infamous now, build your better bust breast issue. My mother was so proud. after that story was published, much to my utter astonishment, literary agents began to approach me. They all asked the same thing. Have you written a novel? And I hadn't, which was ironic because in college I'd never been one of those young writers desperately trying to understand the preternatural magic of Laurie Moore, Andre Dubus, Raymond Carver, the masters of the modern short story. I'd always loved The Doorstops, Les Miserables, The 40 Days of Musaddah, Anna Karenina. But urged on by these agents, I gave up the immediate gratification of writing the short story to hunker down and write a novel. And a year later, I had one. And much to my utter astonishment, an agent sold it instantly. Now, in all fairness, this was the late 1980s when grocery lists could be sold as novels. But it was a novel, and it was going to be published. My wife and I moved from our 520 square foot apartment in Brooklyn to an 1898 Victorian in Vermont, and I continued to work at ad agencies there, so we'd have a health plan and mortgage money. And the novel was published. But now we're living in Vermont, and you are looking at the author responsible for the single worst first novel ever published, bar none. How bad is that first book? On a Sunday afternoon in Vermont, my wife gets a phone call from her college roommate who lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and says, "Oh my gosh, Chris's book, it's reviewed in the Boston Globe today. This is my first major review." So my wife says, "Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Is it good?" And her roommate, realizing she has made an egregious mistake calling, says, "I don't remember." So my wife says, "Can you read it to us?" And her roommate, thinking infinitely more quickly now, says, "I would, but I've already bound the newspapers up for recycling and they're in the basement of the apartment." This was 1989, years before you could go www.bostonglobe.com and assess the carnage. So I had to wait until the next day to go to the Fletcher Free Library in Burlington, Vermont, to read the day before's Boston Globe in a review of my first novel that ends with this paragraph. And so, although Bohjalian attacks his first novel with real energy, his writing is styleless and without grace. And the quaint St. Martin's tradition of citing the editor in the acknowledgments, in this case, did absolutely nothing to ensure the quality of editorial detail, a subpar debut in every way I can imagine, and some I probably can't. Now, that was 19 books ago. Aren't you all glad you're here today? That was 19 books ago. If nothing else, because of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000-hour rule, I had to have gotten at least a little better, which brings me to The Sleepwalker, my most recent novel. The Sleepwalker actually had its origins when I was having lunch with the director of the University of Vermont Hospital Sleep Center in Burlington. I was going to write a book about dreams, that great Freudian abyss, the id, the subconscious. And I wanted to understand the physiology of the brain when we dream. And he had just come from a patient who was a sleepwalker, and so rather naturally our conversation gravitated there. And suddenly, he was telling me stories of people who sleep cook, sleep drive, sleep jog, sleep sex, sleep murder. And I was absolutely entranced. I knew that this was what I wanted my next novel to be about. This was especially interesting to me because I love the research that goes into a novel, and sleep study is a very new field. It was only in 1968 that the term arousal disorder was coined. It wasn't until 1979 that modern medicine began to categorize all of the different kinds of parasomnias that exist. And forensic sleep medicine, the investigation of sleep crime, as a discipline, it dates back only to 2007. Moreover, sleepwalking is very common. 10% of children sleepwalk. Nearly 4% of adults do too. If you have depression or an obsessive compulsive disorder, you are 3.5 times more likely to sleepwalk. The University of Vermont Hospital Sleep Center has 6 beds, and they are filled almost every night of the year. Now, in all fairness, a lot of those beds are for patients being treated for sleep apnea, but you see my point. Sleepwalking is very, very common. Now, here is what sleepwalking is not: acting out a dream. Sleepwalking occurs in the earlier cycles of sleep. Dreams tend to occur in the latter rapid eye movement cycles of sleep. Here's what sleepwalking is. Imagine that the part of your brain that controls judgment and motor activity, the part of your brain that controls motor activity, is wide awake, and the part of your brain that controls judgment and memory is sound asleep. Virtually anything you can do when you are awake, you can do when you are sleepwalking. What triggers sleepwalking? Exhaustion, stress, alcohol, sleep deprivation, certain medications. We've all heard stories of the way certain sleep aids lead to sleepwalking experiences. And it may come down to one little chemical messenger in the brain, gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. It calms the brain and it helps us to sleep, and it develops as we grow up, which is why children are more likely to sleepwalk than adults. Scientists speculate that some adults who sleepwalk may simply have GABA that never fully developed, or that is far more sensitive to those triggers. As you can see, I loved researching this book. John Gardner, great teacher of writing, short story writer, novelist, once said, "There are 2 ways to wake a reader from the fictional dream: clumsiness, bad writing, and inauthenticity, bad research." I've been guilty of both. I certainly know when I have writer's block in the morning that it means I haven't done my homework. I haven't done sufficient research to really understand the scene, and so I need to roll up my sleeves and do some more. But I also know this: all of you who give me the great gift of reading my books, which is an honor, and I can't thank you enough, read my books not necessarily to learn something, though you might. You might learn something about sleepwalking. You might learn something about the Armenian genocide. But you read my books for the same reason I read the books of so many of the amazing authors here, because I'm entranced by the characters and I want to know what's going to happen to them, because there's something in the story that is causing me to frenetically turn the pages. Which brings me back to sort of the yin and yang of that John Gardner quote, and it's a quote I love from E.M. Forrester. We all know that fiction is truer than history because it goes beyond the evidence. I think about that quote a lot when I am writing. My goal in life is never to write the same book twice. That point noted, I think my books tend to fall into 2 sort of general categories: contemporary literature and historical fiction. The contemporary literature, well, it's such books as The Double Bind, about Laurel Estabrook, a social worker in Vermont who works with the homeless, who believes that she has found among her clients the bastard son of Jay Gatsby and Daisy Faye Buchanan. Or Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, about Emily Shepard, a 16-year-old girl trying desperately to keep it together after a meltdown at Vermont's lone nuclear plant. The historical fiction, well, it falls into such realms as The Light in the Ruins, about one Italian family's collaboration with the Nazis and the price they will pay even after the Second World War, or The Sandcastle Girls, a big, sweeping, epic love story set in Aleppo. Yes, that Aleppo that has broken all of our hearts the last 5 years, in 1915, in the midst of the Armenian genocide. But all of these books, I think, have two threads in common that you will see woven into The Sleepwalker. The first thread is this, and it's an emotion, it's a sensation. And whenever I think of it, I think of a moment in one of my absolute favorite television shows ever, Mad Men. You don't have to have seen a moment of the show to know this sensation, but here's the scene. A middle school-aged girl named Sally Draper gets out of a cab on New York City's Upper East Side, and instead of going to school as she's supposed to, she goes home. And everyone who's watching this scene knows that she is going to catch her father in bed with the downstairs neighbor, and it is going to be devastating for dad and daughter. And I'm watching the scene alone in my TV room in Vermont at 5 of 11 on a Sunday night, and I'm talking to the television set. I'm saying, no, Sally, no, get back in the cab, go to school, don't go home. But she does go home. She catches her father, and it is indeed cataclysmic. That emotion, it's dread. When my books work, they are in part about dread. Now, I have to digress briefly here. When I was talking about dread with a reporter in San Diego in January, she said something to me that was really smart and surprised me. She said, it might be dread for your readers, but it's something else for your characters. And I waited. And she had with her a paperback of my novel, The Guest Room, which had just been published. And she went to the epigraph. And the epigraph is from one of those doorstops I just love, Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. And it's this: I don't think I could love you so deeply if you had nothing to lose and nothing to regret. And she said, it might be dread for your readers, but the underlying emotion for your characters is regret. And I think she's onto something. I think of regret a lot when I think of The Sleepwalker. The other thread from my other books, I think you will see in this new one, goes back to something my daughter said. My daughter's here today. She's a young actor, immensely astute. She's been reading my books for years. She actually has read parts or all of my last 3 books on audio. After she read a rough draft of Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, she said to me, Dad, take this as a compliment because I mean it that way, but I think your sweet spot as a writer is seriously messed up young women. And she's right. Just think of the women in those books that I mentioned. Laurel Esterbrook in The Double Bind, spiraling into madness after a cataclysmic sexual assault. Emily Shepard in Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, popping OxyContin tablets as if they are M&Ms. Serafina Bettini in The Light in the Ruins, a partisan fighting against the Nazis in the Second World War, forever disfigured in a firefight, now a burner or a cutter but with flame. Or all of those Armenian girls in The Sandcastle Girls, Karine, Nevart, Hatun, forever scarred by what they endured under the searing Syrian sun. You will meet 2 more of them in The Sleepwalker, Vermonters in this case. The Sleepwalker is set in the year 2000. It's the story of Annalie Ahlberg, a 48-year-old architect, wife, mother of 2, who one August night in the year 2000 sleepwalks into oblivion, just disappears. And now, in the year 2017, one of her daughters, Liana, a mother herself, is chronicling the way 17 years earlier, her mother's disappearance forever scarred her family. I love what the Washington Post said about this book. They called it dark, Hitchcockian. The Publishers Weekly called it a stylish fusion of mystery and domestic thriller. And I loved those reviews because they got at the novel. There are 5 players in the drama. There's Annalee Ahlberg, the sleepwalker, her husband Warren, an English professor at the nearby college. They have 2 daughters, Liana, 21 years old in the year 2000, an aspiring magician of sorts, and 12-year-old Paige. Paige is an athletic outlier of sorts and a ski racer. Now, I mentioned there are 5 players in the drama. Who's the 5th? Gavin Reichart, 33 years old, a detective with the Vermont State Police who's leading the investigation into Annalee's disappearance, and his relationship with 21-year-old Liana as the novel progresses becomes, as we are wont to say on Facebook, complicated. Now, before I turn it over to you for your questions about, gosh, anything, I'm going to read you 1 page. It is the first page of the novel, and it may or may not be a diary entry. It makes all the sense in the world. You awaken and smell smoke and see that the cat at the foot of your bed is on fire. And so you scoop him up and race to the bathroom and douse him with water in the tub. You reassure him that he'll be fine. He is fine, telling him that everything's okay. You hold him firmly but gently under the faucet because you are worried about his burns. The only thing is, you're not awake, but you're not precisely dreaming either. After all, in the morning the sheets are wet where the cat slept when you both went back to bed, and there is fur in the tub. There are scratch marks on your arms and the back of your hands because the cat was justifiably resistant to the idea of a bath in the middle of the night. And of course, the animal never was on fire. Nothing in the house was on fire. And you're a reasonable person. You know that cats don't spontaneously combust. But in the middle of the night, in the fidelity of that instant, you were saving the cat's life, and that's all that mattered. Or another time, you open your eyes in the charcoal dark and decide that you're hungry. So you stroll to the kitchen and whip up an omelet, tossing atop the whisked eggs in the pan a little cheddar cheese and a handful of baby aspirin. Because in the murkiness of the moment, you were craving the sweet and sour tang of orange St. Joseph's. Or you decide to go for a swim in the river. Or you are teased by a stirring between your legs, then a craving, and so you reach for the body beside you. And if no one's there, you push off the sheets and you climb from the bed. You will search out a stranger who will satisfy it. With any luck, you will wake before you find one, but not always. You are vampiric. And while it would be easy to use words like insatiable or unquenchable, they would be imprecise. Because the libertine needs of your sleeping soul will be sated. They will. And that's the problem. Thank you so much. And thank you. The first question is the hardest for you and for me. Yes, and I will repeat the question.
So, part of the title says, book number 1, what's next after Sleepwalker?
The title of the Sleepwalker says book number 1, what's next? Book number 1 suggests that this is a series. It's not. What I believe happened is this. I was so enamored with Annalee Ahlberg and Liana that when I finished the book, I missed them. And so I wrote a prequel short story called The Premonition, about Annalee's life before she disappeared. And you can certainly find that at all of the online bookstores. And I think that the creation of the premonition created this misperception that there was going to be a sequel. Yes.
In the doorstop category, after 40 years of guilt after graduating from college and graduate school, I recently read Moby Dick. And I just wondered, what's your response to Moby Dick? Unless you're really in love with sperm whales.
The question is this. What is my response to Moby Dick, one of the great doorstops of American literature? I like Moby Dick. It's not my favorite doorstop, and it is a doorstop like many doorstops that has material that would never survive an editor in the year 2017. Exhibit A, the amount you learn about whaling in Moby Dick. Exhibit B, the fact that Victor Hugo spent 60 pages describing the sewer system of Paris in Les Mis. And I find this very interesting about doorstops today and doorstops then. And there have been some great doorstops published recently. I will share with you some of my favorite doorstops of the modern era. But I find this very interesting. Most of us, when we think of Les Miserables, we think of the musical, or we think of the movie, and they begin with Jean Valjean stealing the candlesticks. In the novel Les Miserables, the candlesticks are stolen on page 105. You have 105 pages about the goodness of the cardinal. That would never happen in 2017. But among the doorstops I have just loved that are modern, I loved A Little Life. I loved City on Fire. I loved The Goldfinch. The doorstop is, I loved The Corrections. The doorstop is alive and well. It's just different. Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please use the mics. We have two mics up here so we can all hear you.
This is called the dramatic pause.
So, what do you think are some of the keys to giving a character authenticity as a writer?
What are the keys to giving a character authenticity? Your questions are so terrific. The key to giving a character authenticity is minutia. It's not simply, though this is critical, her eyebrows, his hairline. It's the details of his or her backstory. What do we know about how he or she grew up? What were the defining moments in their childhood? All of that matters. And yes, what do they do during the day? What is their professional life like? When I was writing Before You Know Kindness, which is in part about a public defender, I spent days following a public defender to understand how she spent her life. When I was writing Midwives, I must have interviewed 65 moms and dads who had their babies at home, as well as midwives and OBGYNs. So again, it's doing the research. Now, I will say this, and it is also important to bring your imagination to that character. Most of us, if we are writers, always have our fingers pressed against the glass, looking at the party we weren't invited to. And when you watch, you learn.
I think she was first.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi. I want to go back to what you said a minute ago about things that wouldn't survive editors today. Do you think that's because we have shorter attention spans or we're used to action movies? I mean, what do you think the difference is?
What is the difference? Why do I believe that the doorstop has changed? Is it shorter attention? Yes, let's begin there. I think there are at least two reasons. We do have shorter attention spans, beginning with the way the digital age draws us relentlessly to the social networks and to our phones. That's a reality. But I think there's another reality that has affected our attention spans for literature and how we approach it, and this isn't necessarily a bad one. I think the last 10 years have been a renaissance in television, whether it's Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, Mad Men, The Crown. There is so much remarkable television that we watch. And I think all of us now approach literature with this understanding that, You can't read a political thriller today without thinking of House of Cards, for instance. I think we've got time for one more or two more. Two more, okay.
I have a question about two of your historical-based novels, Skeleton at the Feast and Light in the Ruins. In both of those, you have very complex characters on both sides of the issue, many of whom are Nazi collaborators, or in one case, sort of a Nazi partisan. Do you ever get blowback from your portrayal of participants in those novels, or the way you portray the...
Okay, the question is this. In Skeletons at the Feast, which is a novel about one German family's complicity in the Holocaust, or The Light in the Ruins, which is about one Italian family's collaboration with the Nazis, have I ever gotten blowback for having German characters or Italian collaborators who have some degree of moral ambiguity to them? They are not simply the devil with a monocle. No, I don't think I have. And I think that's largely because Skeletons at the Feast and The Light in the Ruins, unlike a lot of my contemporary literature, aren't about moral ambiguity. They are first and foremost about people's willingness to be complicitous with evil. As Francesca Bettini says, Francesca Rosati says in The Light in the Ruins, when she's talking about her father's deal with the Nazis, you are collaborating with the cowardly angels, quoting Dante.
Thank you.
I think this is the last question.
Yes, hi. I've read a lot of stuff you've said, and as the person who introduced you said, living in Vermont, I think you've said, has really inspired your writing. And having lived in Burlington for a very long time, I'm just wondering why, moving from New York to Vermont really, inspired you.
Why did my wife and I move to Vermont, and why did it inspire us? We moved to Vermont, to be completely honest, because it was the 1980s, and we were looking at ourselves in the mirror as an advertising executive and a bond trader, and we were afraid we were on an up escalator that if we did not get off now when we were young, would forever lock us into that role. And that wasn't the role that we wanted. It wasn't feeding our souls. My wife is an immensely talented photographer, and she wasn't taking pictures. I had no idea if I had any talent at all as a writer. Certainly I hadn't demonstrated it, but I wanted desperately to be a writer. And so we made the decision to get off that financial up escalator, take a risk, and see if we could feed our soul. Because here's what I always tell young writers, I tell young artists. You have one chance in this world to live your life the way it should be. Live it with an appropriate moral compass, do the right thing, and feed your heart. Today, I want all of you to feed your souls with books. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so honored.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.